Peace and blessings, everyone, and love and light to you all. New York is the most expensive it's ever been, the most expensive city in the country. And a study found that more than half of all New Yorkers can't meet the minimum cost of living here, largely driven by housing costs. The affordability crisis is hitting Black families especially hard, which is why the largest group leaving our city are Black long-time New Yorkers, driven out by high rental costs and the seeming impossibility of homeownership. For Black New Yorkers, homeownership is a dream and a goal that builds wealth, builds power, and builds community. But for too many, it remains just that, a dream or an unattainable goal because of its expense. Through tireless work and sacrifice, thousands of New Yorkers have purchased homes to provide security, invest in the future, and build generational wealth. Some of the people who have worked the hardest to achieve this part of what some call the American dream are people of more color and immigrants. However, this country's history of institutional racism and hatred have led to redlining, discriminatory lending, and additional issues that make it more difficult for Black people to own homes. These issues are not confined to the past. Today, we see discrimination, deed theft, and gentrification, as many Black homeowners have also lost their homes due to partition scams, notary scams, and zombie mortgages. At a time when Black families are being forced out of the city, it's important that we provide Black homeowners with the resources and information needed to combat unscrupulous actors and untenable situations. As a public advocate, I have always been at the forefront of fighting for the rights of the most vulnerable in our city, including advocating for fair housing and tenants' rights. At the same time, it has become increasingly clear that Black homeowners often find themselves overlooked in these debates of being included in the discussion. They are caught in a narrative that unfairly paints homeownership as either evil or exclusively reserved for the privileged. As a child of immigrants myself from the Caribbean, I understand the hard work it takes for so many Black folks of the diaspora to build security and stability for their families, and I'm committed to including everyone in the community in our public conversations. It's also important to push policies which give homeowners the much-needed relief and support they need, such as property tax relief, utility relief, and programs geared towards offering information, support, and advocacy. All of these things are vital to securing our right to access generational wealth through homeownership, ensuring that families can build a lasting legacy for future generations other tools. Black homeownership helps to secure our communities. It solidifies our footing in the American project. We've seen the challenges of the past, the threats of this moment, and we must overcome them to build a stronger foundation for the future. Peace.
Good evening, New York City, and thank you for joining us this evening as we discuss Black history and home ownership. I'm so grateful to be here this evening to share this conversation with all of you. My name is Solomon Acevedo. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Deputy Public Advocate for Housing and Health Equity. And I'm glad to be joined by a group of individuals who are not only the future of innovation for thinking about Black home ownership in New York City, but are the people that are on the ground now making it happen. And so I just have the pleasure to be joined by this group, and I will just name them as an introduction. We have with us New York City Council member Chris Banks. Is Brooklyn in the house? We also have Deputy Borough President Kimberly Council. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We also have Tony Lindsay, the curator of this important conversation, the founder of New York Homeowners Alliance here. And we're so happy to have you as well. Thank you for inspiring this conversation, and thank you for bringing your conversation partners to the table. I want to also introduce Kaya Royal, who is the chairman of the advocacy committee at Black Ed Influencers United. Thank you, Kaya, for joining us here. And we also have people directly impacted, allies, accomplices on the road to finding out what Black home ownership justice looks like. We have Tanya Chanel and Phoebe Douglas, members of New York Homeowners Alliance, here today to have this conversation, which is not a new conversation when we talk about inequity, when we talk about home ownership. This is historical. We stand on land that was stolen from indigenous people, and we have to remember the construct of capitalist exploitation that has driven our economy, and that we are still working to untangle. And Black home ownership is at the center of this. And I'm no historian, but I know one. And thankfully, he happens to be on the call with us. So I'm going to kick it over to Kaya Royal to start our conversation off, to kind of give us a framing of why Black home ownership is important, what the continuity with the history of oppression is for us today, and what it means for this conversation right now. Kaya?
I thank you, Brother Solomon. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, our distinguished guests. Um, I'd like to start out by saying when you're having these type of discussions involving addressing uh, racism, systemic racism, and inequity, it would behoove you to understand how things came to be in the first place. I just want to give you a few numbers. Uh, Today in 2024 in New York City, New York State, white families possess 67% of homes in the state, Asians 52%, blacks 34%, non-black Hispanics 29%. And to give you further context to those numbers, I just want to take you on a little historical journey to show you how we've come to that point. I'll start out by the Homestead Act of 1862, where essentially this was the biggest land grab that was out by the government. So the rules were basically that if you had tended to any land and lived on it 5 years or more and made minimal repairs, you were allowed to have that land, titles to that land, up to 160 acres. Of course, this was enacted 1862 on the eve of the Civil War. So that kind of like excluded a certain group from participating, and that was Black people, because we were all enslaved in this country. But it did not stop European immigrants who was immigrating to this country from scooping up all these lands that they did not, in fact, work on for the amount of 5 years or more. So approximately 400 to 600,000 white families settled homes and farms in this country. The blacks, after the Civil War, who was interested in getting in on that land, well, certainly had their lives threatened due to Jim Crow laws that was enacted, and it just would be far too dangerous, and no one would sell to them. So once again, this is the beginning to show you how Black people specifically were marginalized and shut out of the home ownership market in the United States. Just like to fast forward to 1866, while we may have had a semi opportunity to address the inequalities, thanks to Andrew Johnson, he vetoed the famous 40 acres and a mule, which upon every slave being freed, they were supposed to get 40 acres and a mule after 250 years of bondage. But President Andrew Johnson vetoed that bill in 1866, and Black people were essentially ignorant, having ignorance imposed on us, homeless, jobless, and no friends in the world to basically fend on their own. 1934, we saw the Federal Housing Administration created, and something called redlining also once again prevented Black people from attaining homes. They refused to insure mortgages of Blacks. The term redlining comes from when they would draw on the maps, they would essentially just write in red areas where the focus of Black people resided. So anything outside of that, they didn't allow us to buy property. So that's where redlining actually comes from. For our viewers out there, I'd just like to give you a little bit of concept. When you hear people talk about buying a home and, you know, it's the American dream, I just want to give you the importance of buying a home. So many Americans were able to send their children to college, to recoup the equity, the homes accumulated over a certain amount of time. So owning a home wasn't just the American dream, if you will. It was a means of income, allowing you to maneuver, allowing you to really establish yourself and your family generations in this country. And Black people were not afforded that for a very long time. Just for further context, and I don't want to be too verbose, uh, the average income of a Black person in America is 60% of a white family's income, and 5% of their wealth Black people only attain. So whatever white folks have, Black people have 5% of that wealth. We have seen certain policies enacted, but it certainly hasn't addressed the racist policies, the systemic racist policies that has disallowed Black people from competing in the housing market. The 1968 Fair Housing Act, and that was when my people actually bought their home in 1968. But that would be an outlier because so many Black folks didn't have any income to purchase homes during that time, regardless of the 1968 Fair Housing Act. 1958, homeownership for whites was 57% and 34.5% for Blacks. So as I cited earlier, we are in 2020, and that number has actually decreased from 34.5% to 34%. So I just want to give everyone a historical context of understanding how we came to be where we are. And unfortunately, it is still present to this day. And I just want to wrap it up, Solomon, to pass on to someone else. When we're talking about equity, so as it pertains to Black people in America, many times we use the word racist and we associate it with feelings of morale. I just want everyone to understand, and I know it's very difficult for those to understand the concept. Racism is and always has been an economic concept. So when you're not addressing the economics, it is very difficult to combat the very, very specific policies that marginalize and kept Blacks from benefiting off of their labor and allowed to live the American dream. So if the conversations that we're having are not centered around equity and correcting the past wrongs with specific, not broad and ambiguous policies of benign neglect, but specific policies, we're essentially spinning our wheels and we'll find ourselves going nowhere fast. Thank you so much, Solomon.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kaya. That was incredible journey, the timeline. Thank you for catching those important moments in history. And to the viewers out there, I hope that you will go back to this part of the conversation and see how the dots are connected. And thank you for saying and mentioning and naming, that racism is an economic policy. It's something that's enacted with intention and thus must be combated intentionally. And that's something that we as policymakers have to grapple with. And at this point in the conversation, I'm going to kick it off to our New York City Council member, Chris Banks from Brooklyn, to talk a little bit about what's going. Yes, Brooklyn in the house. I forgot to do the ceremonial introduction, just to let us know, responding to Kaya and the framing around Black home ownership and the history of it. And now in the present day, you as a policymaker, how do you wrestle with the past, and what are you confronting now in your district and with your constituents around home ownership, and how are you impacted by this as a policymaker yourself?
Well, my parents immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago, and they actually actually my grandmother immigrated and bought my mother during the 60s. They purchased their house on Van Sicklen between Newlots and Hegeman, I believe in 1970. Grandfather worked as a cabbie, or what they would call in Trinidad was a maxi cab driver. And they lived in an apartment for a couple of, I think it was 2 or 3 years, and then they purchased a house. And that was the proudest moment of my grandfather and my grandmother, because this is something that they was near and dear to them in the Caribbean. They owned their home. Home ownership wasn't an issue in the Caribbean. They're compared to coming to the United States and not seeing as many black and brown folks owning properties, and then looking at obviously the systemic racism that existed, and well, we say blatant racism that existed that prevented blacks from owning property. These are the things that I would say have added and to a continuation as we are to today, where we are dealing with a housing crisis. Some folks may say it's manufactured. Some folks may say that it's that somebody else or the others created this situation. But we are living in a housing crisis as we speak, where where especially where either we're not there's not enough housing being built, um, or it's the agenda of some folks to focus on building more high density housing, or creating more tenants in New York City. And I think that that's the troubling part, especially when you look at the mayor's policy on the city of yes, which I think is really a blatant uh, no, city of no to the hardworking folks throughout New York City. When you put forth a plan that talks about no home ownership, and it just perpetuates, to me, poverty, and it weakens, and it continues to strip Black communities of any power that we quote unquote have gained over the years. I think that's something that is problematic and troubling. And not only that, but we also have to look at the fact that if we're not talking about home ownership, if we're not talking about pushing policies that give folks a stake in their community, to me, we're talking about death. We're talking about weakening a community and putting them up on the block to be sold. There is a effort to continue to destabilize the Black community, and obviously they've learned it. They know exactly, if you have power over the land, you deny and create policies, and you put forth programs that strip Black and brown folks of the opportunity to own. The reality is that we will flee and leave the city. And like was said earlier, you're seeing that on ways where folks are just leaving, they're picking up and leaving. There are, I mean, even if you look at people say, public housing, as a New York City Council person, I'm also the chair for New York City, the Public Housing Committee. And you can just see how they treat NYCHA residents. NYCHA residents, one of the most abused, disrespected tenants in probably the entire country. There's an attack on public housing, and obviously that's where they've put. Blacks have been concentrated in public housing for maybe the last 20 to 30 or so years. And look how they've treated public housing. And a lot of folks are forced now being displaced to some degree out of public housing. So there's nothing that's safe for Black folks to be able to build a nest and progress. The focus is again to destabilize the Black community, and the commitment is clear through some of the policies that are being pushed, especially through the city of yes. And that particular policy has and to obviously to me will lead to weakening our community. And that's something again that I think we definitely have to fight against. And that's why I'm one of the voices in the city council that will definitely be weighing in on that and making sure that the desires of the 42nd Councilman District are known. And through my conversations with local community leaders, local community board, and this is the reality. So if we don't push policies that support and undergird Black and brown folks, we will be at a abject loss. And that's one of the things that I'm making sure that we can build voices. So, spaces like this, I think are very important to have these type of conversations.
Thank you so much, Council Member, for your comments, your feedback, your courage. Definitely enjoy the fact that you're here to speak on behalf of the people fearlessly, and credit not discrimination, a bill the public advocate had just got on the table is one of those policies, I think, innovatively that could help the future of New York City. So tell your friends in the council and see how you could help build support on this. But I know you have to leave this conversation a bit early because you're off on your way to something. I wanted to just follow up with what you said and see if there's any other particular policies that you wanted to identify in the future things we should be looking at for the future of Black home ownership, and anything out of the box that you want to recommend or have been thinking about yourself. You're on mute, but sorry about that.
Yeah, well, I would say obviously we need to look at reparations. That's something obviously we need to address seriously. I know there's been talks, there's been some movement up in the state, but I think you can't. The only way to really undergird folks, we have to really start talking about money. And I think that's what the focus should be. We already know the facts. We know the Black folks were put in slavery. We understand. We get it. But we just need to start talking about dollars and cents and how we are going to invest back into our communities, because the reality is that we control all the levers of power in New York State. We have a Black mayor. We have the city council is more diverse, Black and brown. The speaker is Black. The speaker of the state assembly is Black. The speaker of the Senate is Black. We control major power. There's the power is concentrated, and it's the Black community has it. My question again is that it seems like we're getting nowhere on a lot of levels, and we just have some more work to do. We just got some more. We have more work to do as elected officials. I think we can get there, but it's going to take some real courage and a real radical approach. First, in changing folks' mindset, and then I believe we'll be able to possess the land.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you making the time to join. I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit about where you were going to celebrate and be thankful for building generational wealth.
Yes, there's a young Black sister I actually went to high school with, and I went to high school with one of my brothers who has opened up one of the first dispensaries. She's born and bred from East New York. She was actually over the news. Leanne, all over the news this morning. And I believe the mayor, different electeds came, and the press has been out there. But here's a sister that did it the right way, did it the legal way. And we would definitely want to, lift her up, undergird her, and support her. And again, this is an excellent way to talk about creating Black wealth and undergirding communities like East New York, because knowing Leanne's not moving out of East New York. She's been in the neighborhood for a long time. she's not going anywhere. And again, these are the types of stories I think are important to push and encourage the need for Black collectivity, and also understanding that we can build our own wealth. We don't need folks to tell us how to build our wealth. Just give us the access, and that goes talks to hits on the issue of equity. And here's a perfect example. So I'm actually going to be heading out to go support her, not to buy. Maybe I'll buy something, but but I'm going to support.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Banks. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Have enjoyed the rest of your night, and we shall continue on. And welcome, Deputy Borough President Kimberly Council. Thank you so much. Since we did mention some policy making, and before we get into the deeper present issues, I wanted to just see if you had any feedback and thoughts about the importance of home ownership and the conversation about housing in New York City, given that our borough president is launching a conversation around for housing. So if you wanted to quickly, well, however you'd like to chime in on that, please share.
I'm going to try to do what preachers don't do, which is be brief. Thank you guys so much. I'm so glad to be here tonight. Just tomorrow, we're having a meeting. The BP actually has invited all 160 elected officials in the city of New York to have a conversation, to begin to have a conversation about how we address the housing crisis that is in New York. And as some of you may know, the borough president put out a about 250-page document, 201 pages, comprehensive plan for Brooklyn that will be the document. It's a living, breathing document, so it's not etched in stone, but that will kind of guide how he approaches land use. So he is definitely someone who is solution oriented and is looking for solutions. We are actually in the process of working with the AG's office and the DA's office to try to put together a series of workshops specifically for homeowners around deed, equity theft, and foreclosure prevention. But I think, and I know we got a historian on the call, and I don't want to, step on any toes or anything like that. But I think it's really important that we do have a conversation about where we have been and where we are now, because we need to understand the why to understand where we are. I heard the council member talking about the wage gap. The wealth gap between African Americans and our the majority counterparts, white Americans. I read in a book called Complicity, talking about how the North benefited from slavery, that it would take about 230 some odd years for Black people to catch up to white people's wealth. And I think when we, it's having a conversation about reparations, but really putting it into dollars and cents. And when we began to talk about all of the things that have happened historically, the redlining, the restrictive covenants, all of the things that have happened to keep us out of home ownership. Just like Chris, my mom came from the South, not from the Caribbean. She came from the South, my mom and dad. And it was her dream. It was her desire that we purchase a house. And had we not purchased a house when we did, there's absolutely no way that we'd be able to afford one in this market. So we have got to begin to think about how we can set aside or create opportunities for, the middle class, the lower middle class, and people who are marginalized to have participation in home ownerships, to build equity. Back in 1982, East Brooklyn congregations got together, and Nehemiah houses, they built over 4,500 houses. My church, Berean Baptist Church, was a part of that. We built housing over in Brownsville. We called it Horizon Village, where people could purchase homes for $30,000, $39,000. You only needed a $5,000 down payment. So we are seeing the cost of living steadily increase and people's salaries remaining flat. So there's a whole bunch of work that we need to do. And I've had some conversations with some state legislatures and some really powerful people in the city council around trying to push the state to recreate or even to reinvest in a project very similar to Nehemiah houses. So I don't want to go into that until we get some meat on the bones, but just know that this is something that is very important. So we do need to build more housing. We do need to create deep levels of affordability. And I think that the BP is positioning himself to kind of take the lead on some of that work. But we also, in the same instance, need to start thinking about how we create opportunities for home ownership so that we don't get into this permanent rental economy.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for weaving that into the context, not only speaking about home ownership and that pathway and that dream, but also the land use component and how those factors fit into decision making. And yeah, this all connecting and leading up to the experiences of actual homeowners. And so I'm so happy that, again, Tony Lindsay brought us all together to have this conversation, the founder of New York Homeowners Alliance. And at the top of the conversation, the public advocate, mentioned that homeownership is often confused with default excessive wealth. And that's not the reality for homeowners in New York, especially Black homeowners, first time family, single family homes. And so our community has been impacted. And part of the reason why we're having this conversation is because of the lived experiences of these folks who are on the conversation now. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony to let us know, why he founded this organization, what they're addressing currently, and how they see the future coming. And this will be like a more of an open conversation. So, I might just chime in and ask a couple random questions, and feel free, my panelists, to do the same. And if anybody out there in the audience has something they want to share or say, please feel free to use that chat, and we will be getting to comments at the end of this conversation. So, Tony, off to you.
Yes, hello, good evening, and thank you very much. I'd like to thank the public advocate and all of the panelists, everyone who's here for joining this call. There's some really brilliant people on this call, so I'm really happy to be here participating. And I wanted to kind of piggyback on what Reverend Counsel was saying. Every time she speaks, she makes me kind of excited and gets me started. I want to start going. But the reason why I started New York Homeowners Alliance is because, one, I've always been a person who has been an advocate, particularly for people in the Black community, because we understand what our experience has been historically in this country. And one thing that I've always recognized within our community is that we have always been a resourceful people. So throughout all the history, we understand the history, we understand the marginalization and the disenfranchisement. But I also want us to recognize and remember that we have overcome a lot during that time. And so the impetus for me deciding to create New York Homeowners Alliance was really based upon my own advocacy and love for my people, and the desire to always introduce our community to aspects of building and maintaining generational wealth. And we all know that the best way to access wealth is through home ownership in this country. We understand what the American dream has always been, but unfortunately, throughout the history of this country, Black people have been denied access to that American dream through systemic policies of racism. And I appreciate Brother Kaya bringing that up. Because we really need to understand what racism is. It isn't about feelings. That's prejudice. We understand prejudice. We understand bigotry. But racism, it operates as a system. It is a system. It is an action. And it is one that this country has thrived upon for many, many years. So with all of that said, we have to look at the policies that we are currently subjected to that keep us in this certain position, right? So what I've always done is I've tried to educate people on the aspects of home ownership, how to buy a home, the certain processes that go into maintaining your home, because a lot of people don't really understand too much, and also, I just advocate for entrepreneurship for Black people. Now, what led me to create New York Homeowners Alliance was the implementation of Local Law 18, and everybody knows it as the proverbial Airbnb ban, right? And that law, it's one display of how Black people get left out of the conversation. And this is what I wanted to say when it comes to Local Law 18. Now, the law was passed pretty much as a way. It was touted as something that was to be a sort of protection for the Black community, protecting us from the evils of gentrification. And I think the presumption under that law was that Black people, in large part, don't own anything, or we don't. how do I place this? I'll say this. When it comes to the people who were utilizing, let's say, platforms like Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, people who were engaging in short-term rentals, many of those people were Black and brown people who were utilizing short-term rentals in order to sustain in an economy that is just highly unsustainable right now. A lot of the people that were doing short-term rentals were just doing this as a way of trying to survive. Now, we understand that there were other people who were coming into the community who were also doing short-term rentals. There were a lot of bad actors, a lot of people that just went a little bit too far. People who were, like renting out dozens of apartments across the city for Airbnb arbitrage. But once again, what happened was a policy was implemented that was supposed to help particularly marginalized community as it was, touted, but it wound up hurting us because the people who were using short-term rentals in order to survive and supplement their income, we've now been boxed out. We've been boxed out of being able, largely boxed out due to really restrictive policies that disenfranchise us. It disenfranchises us, but it provides a windfall for wealthy developers, for multiple dwelling owners of Class B buildings, hotels. And so one of the main issues that I try to impart upon my community is that we have to control our politics. And the reason why I say this is because quite often when there are agendas, political agendas that are pushed forward under the auspices of equity and diversity and justice, quite often the people leading or supporting or funding these fights, they're non-Black people. We have to stop allowing other groups to step in and spearhead our own campaigns for justice, because we're allowing people to take a paternalistic view of the things that we need in order to create real equity and opportunity for our community. And I guess I would say the last thing that I would say about this is that, the major contributor to our marginalization, I think it's the failure to prioritize legislation to undo the damage caused by the deliberate systemic exclusion of Black people from access to wealth through homeownership, as well as entrepreneurship. And as many of you know, we're regularly denied business loans, right? That other groups are typically granted in order to set up shop in our neighborhoods. We're denied mortgage loans at a greater rate than anyone else, as evidenced with that that recent Wells Fargo discovery and the lawsuit. So, and even when we are approved for mortgages, we often don't have enough to cover the down payment like many other groups do because of the priority that's been given to them to establish generational wealth, and often at our expense. So, there are a lot of issues that we have to cover, that we have to talk about. And I just want us to be honest in that conversation because too many of us are not allowed to participate in the conversation.
Thank you for that overview, Tony, and for sharing your inspiration and for becoming a leader of a movement. When the gap is open, someone courageous needs to step in, and I appreciate the voice of the people being lifted up through you. And it brings up a lot of questions for folks who may not be familiar with the nuances of the impact of the Airbnb bill, or should we say the change to local law 18. So people have been impacted, and you mentioned how. Can you go into a little bit, and this is for everyone on the panel who's been impacted, the kinds of restrictions that were placed on homeowners that didn't take into account folks who may not have the kind of wealth that necessitates being up to those codes?
Right. I'll definitely leave it to two of the members of New York Homeowners Alliance. We have Tanya here and we also have Phoebe here. But I do want us to make one thing clear. The conversation has largely become Airbnb. It's been centered in Airbnb. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. It makes it easy for people to get a skewed understanding of what this entire situation is about. We're not proponents of Airbnb. We don't care about Airbnb. It's about our rights as homeowners. And I'm talking specifically to 1 and 2 family homeowners, private dwellings, people who own, private dwellings, as even stated in the state multiple dwelling laws. Like when you have state laws that exempt us pretty much from most of those regulations that multiple dwellings, meaning the larger buildings and apartment buildings, are subjected to, our interests are not being protected. And it's because we're dealing with a policy that was largely spearheaded by the hotel industry, who is in conflict with the Airbnb industry. So you have these 2 giant corporations fighting each other, and who's getting caught in the middle? Us. And it's just think of it. It's just like Uber, right? Like Uber, everybody does Uber. They do Uber Eats. You drive people, you do Uber in your car, right? You're allowed to use that. So I don't see any campaign by our government to stop Uber. I don't see any campaign to stop those types of things. But when it comes to Airbnb, we're not allowed to use our own homes to share them with guests, which actually stimulates our economy. But I'm sorry, I'll just pass it to Tanya or Phoebe, because I know I run my mouth.
You're just passionate.
So I have to agree, and thank you so much for including me in this conversation, because this is a conversation that I have way too frequently. I am not only a New Yorker, but I'm a realtor as well. So I see, and I've been in New York. I think I'm 4th or 5th generation Bed-Stuy, right? And so I've seen the changes that have happened, and I see the impact that it's having on Black and brown homeowners, personally, and again as an agent. And a lot of great points were brought up about the inequity of basically financial preparedness that helps people, that allows us to own homes. I fortunately bought my home 20 years ago before the insanity started occurring, but holding on to it has become challenging because of the economy, right? And so just to answer, I think Solomon, you asked, what was one of the direct impacts of this law? So I'm a single mom, my babies. And one of the impacts of the law, they say that we are not allowed to have locks on our interior doors. So we have to allow people into our homes and not have locks on the doors. Now, that just poses so many safety issues. I can't even believe like that. I had locks on my bedroom doors before I started Airbnb, just as a matter of privacy, because I have, I have a big family, and so locks were, standard. So I think that's one of the things that local law 18, well, one way that they impacted me personally, right? And so because I'm not going to subject myself or my children to that kind of I'm a woman of faith, but you just don't test certain things. So I think that some of the restrictions of the law, the way it's written, absolutely targets. I think it targets us small property owners, right? If we get somebody in here, if we rent to somebody long term and they stay, we get put out of our property before they do. Now, as a realtor, I sell lots of properties that are fully occupied. The homeowner is selling because they can no longer afford to maintain their mortgage because their occupant stopped paying, and you can't put them out, and you still have to keep the utilities on it. You basically now have a dependent that you can't write off your taxes unless you know how to manipulate the tax laws. But we should not be held accountable to the same, rules and regulations of these massive property owners, right? So I think that's all set up for these developers, because I get developers calling me all the time, asking me if I want to sell my house, and B, hey, do you have any properties that are off market? We'll pay cash. And then I talk to homeowners, because much like Tony, I try to educate people. You don't necessarily have to sell your house if you understand the equity in your property. But then we're back at they can't refinance because they don't have the credit to, substantiate it, even though they're currently paying their mortgage, or they're, paying a mortgage that could possibly. So anywho, I think the law is so murky. It's so murky, and we can argue the nuances of it, but the bottom line is that 1 and 2 family homeowners should not be subjected to that. Like, there's something put things in place that protect homeowners, right? As much as it does Um, I have a problem with the terms landlord and tenant. Tenants pay rent. We don't own land and we lord over no one. So that's why I keep stuttering. But I think there has to be a more logical approach that addresses, these laws were written way back when. So local law 18 was written just a few years ago, but the multi-property dwelling laws and all of that were written when New York City we had tenements and people were coming here to settle, and it was a lot different.
Yeah. And there were concerns about disease and all that type of stuff.
The infrastructure has changed so much, and I think the homeowners, we have gotten caught up in a big political and racially motivated economic crunch. So I don't want to keep rambling, because I can talk about real estate and finance and the inequity of it all day long. But that, for me personally, that's a whole safety issue of removing locks, interior locks, and they have to share my personal space, and I have to be here. Like, my kids go to boarding school. I don't want to babysit adults, right? So that's just not fair. So, Phoebe,
No, you're fine. I mean, a lot of the points that I was going to bring up echo what you said, Tanya. I think, we're not afforded factors of safety that, even some of these larger corporations that own these bigger buildings are afforded. So we take on a huge risk because we get fined and treated like some of these larger entities. But what short-term rental had provided, at least for me, was that factor of safety, because I knew the families and it was mostly families that I would allow into my home. And, I didn't have to worry about them squatting in my home or, causing damage like I had to be subjected to when I had a traditional tenant. And I think that when I went through those horror stories with my traditional tenant, I was not treated welcomely by the city when I reached out for help and assistance with my tenant. Instead, I was treated like the bad guy. So I think that there needs to be further discussions within the city government that shine a light on smaller homeowners, because the reality of it is we get pushed. We're an afterthought, and we get pushed to the wayside, and we're suffering from that. Like what Tony and Tanya said, a lot of people are moving out. I get calls all the time. I get letters all the time from, real estate investors wanting to buy my house. And, I think now that local law 18 has been implemented with all these strict and, frankly, unfollowable rules, and I'm not willing to put myself, and I take care of my mother as well. I'm not willing to put my house at risk again and go through the financial burden that I did with my traditional tenant. That I consider it sometimes, and that's an issue, especially, to echo the overall theme of this call, is to, galvanize, minority home ownership, Black home ownership in the city.
Right. I would also say that in a more forward thinking process, we have to identify like the specific issues that are even causing the housing crisis that we're experiencing right now. And we know that we've been dealing with decades of excessive spending and policy that just has not been created in a manner that benefits all the people of this city. And, I know some people think like, Black people are just anti-development, like anti-developer, anti-new. That's not it. It's whenever you have developments coming in almost exclusively into our neighborhoods and pushing us out. That's where the problem comes. And, there are so many issues that are causing the housing crisis, and short-term rentals just isn't one of them. I mean, if you even look at the data, even after the implementation of local law 18, rents have barely moved. The prices of hotels, of course, have skyrocketed because, they've just kind of cornered like this whole market. And now you have people who are like, class B dwellings, which are, these huge apartment buildings where they have like the nice luxury condos in there. They're now renting out luxury Airbnbs for thousands of dollars per night. And the people who cannot Airbnb are the folks like us who are charging $89 a night for a visit, for a visitor to come from, outside of like tourists. And another thing that people are missing is that short-term rentals brought a massive amount of a tourism economy. It stimulated the local economies in our neighborhoods by bringing people who were not really going to be in our neighborhoods anyway. All of the tourism has typically been centered in Manhattan. But once you had the outer boroughs where they were engaging in STRs, you were starting to see like almost a melting pot being created, where you saw a lot of local businesses were stimulated. People were able to afford their homes. But this blanketed law that pretty much is modeled based upon regulations that were set for large multiple dwellings and hotels and apartment buildings, that should not apply to us. What we need to do is focus on the 46,000 rent stabilized apartments that are intentionally being held off of the market. I've been talking about this for years. In 2021, there was a study that showed there was over 60,000 rent stabilized units that were being held off the market. When you hold those apartments, those much needed housing stock, that's the housing stock. When you hold that off of the market, it will drive up the prices of rent. It's demand. So you're creating an increased demand. People are withholding these apartments. Prices are going up. And then you have the hotel industry. You have the HTC and other groups who are saying, hey, it's those pesky small homeowners doing the STR rentals. Well, the evidence just does not hold true. And so people need to pay attention and understand that.
Thanks. Thank you both. Thank you all, Tanya, Phoebe, and Tony, for giving that framework around local law 18 and the impacts and the disproportionate impacts, because I don't think that people often get that story from the people who are living it, who maybe were just, having, as you mentioned, a temporary tenant as a supplemental income that was not dependent on being regulated at the standard of a hotel. So I just want to kick it to Kaya real quick to see how this tracks with other like movements in history around homeownership, where real estate turns against each other and Black people are crushed in the middle.
Well, I'm not muted. Okay, good. I'm not muted. Solomon, I want to go back to something that Council Member Banks had stated, and he says that, well, we control the policies. He says, we have such a large number of Black representation in office that we can change it. Well, with all due respect to Council Member, nothing has changed. In order to really move Black people forward vertically, you have to change the economics. I had stated this to Tony. On the eve of the Civil War, Black people were approximately 95% enslaved in this country and 95% illiterate. We possess less than 1% of the wealth in America. We are in 2024. Black people are 88% literate and 100% free. We possess 1% of the wealth in America. So and I'd also like to include that we are approximately 15% of the population. It's basic economics. So we can have these conversations where some of us are able to buy homes. My family worked very hard. Most of them were able to buy homes, but that is an outlier. If you do not have specific policies that allow Black people to have access to resources, to move not horizontal, but vertical movement, economic wise, then you're just spinning your wheels. And I would say something that is quite maybe controversial to some. We can no longer entertain these broad and ambiguous conversations for equity for all and inclusion and diversity. The oppression of Black people in this country and the laws that I cited earlier were very, very specific. There was nothing broad and ambiguous about them. It is nonsensical to now have broad and ambiguous solutions and expect to correct those specific policies that affected a very, very specific portion of the population, 15% people, 1% of the wealth, we can have these conversations until we're blue in the face.
That's right.
We don't have the money. We don't have the numbers. So when you talk about politicians and who's elected and controlling the policy, well, once you start focusing on the economics, you can reward politicians for now acting policies so it pertains to your group. And you can punish them, like other groups do, when they do not enact policies that are for your group. So lastly, Councilmember Banks mentioned something about reparations. We hear the term reparations, we hear the conversation, and I think most people are laymen on this conversation, and that's no disrespect to anyone. When you're having the conversation on reparations, it is a complete and utter waste of time to speak from a perspective of feelings.
That's right.
You have to focus on what can be litigated. And so it pertains to this country. There are constitutional violations when we're talking about the Freeman banks that stole the money from Black people, from Black freemen. This can be proved. This can be litigated. This is not a conversation of feelings. So we can be compensated, just like other groups have been very specifically compensated. I can go on and on and on about very specific violations to the Constitution. So when we have these conversations about reparations, no, everybody is not like Oprah. You get a car, you get a car. No, we don't mean that. But we have to have policies that are very, very specific, not people of color, not all people, not poor people, that are for Black people and that are specifically monitored to be for Black people. And then you will start seeing some real change and some vertical movement.
That's right.
I thank you for that message. I think the chat was lit up with affirmations for you, sharing what you shared, and just wanted to reiterate intro 401, credit not discrimination. It's not reparations, but it is a step towards stopping the brutalization of people economically through preventing them from having the pathway to the American dream. So just introduced today in City Council, and so we hope to pass it this year, a bill that was actually drafted in 2016, just to emphasize Kaya's point around the long tail of legislation and what we must do to act more quickly, more precisely, more specifically. So I want to kind of pivot back to Reverend Kimberly Council around your the borough president's Brooklyn plan and think about what parts of it do you feel like resonate with the conversation here? What aspects of economic development are being coupled with development of homes and housing and protecting other rights regarding tenants?
You're asking about tenants' rights
just the whole how do you see no, actually I'll leave the tenants part out, and just when it comes to economic development, the relationship between homeownership and the plan for Brooklyn, how is that something that is mutually reinforcing?
Well, I mean, like as I shared, VP is he has invited all 160. Him and I think a city council member, Eric Botcher, have invited all 160 elected officials to come to sit at the table to begin to have a conversation around what is happening and how can we begin to develop strategies to deal with this crisis. I think his and I mean again, like a large part of the conversation, of course, is around affordability and how do we attack what is happening in the industry. We've had a few conversations where he's talked about there's only one state in the country where the cost of rent has decreased, and that was Minnesota. And that was because they built more housing. And so his goal right now is to build more housing. And to have a conversation about how we do that. The challenge that we are facing right now is that the 421A expired and the legislators didn't renew it. They didn't amend it. They didn't put anything else together. The governor put forth a series of executive executive orders trying to kind of put a patchwork together, but the legislators still did not move on that. So the BP is trying to kind of, bring people together to say, hey, listen, we have to do something to begin to create an environment where we are addressing this crisis head on. And even nobody's having conversations about building affordable condominiums or affordable apartments, or I think everything is on the table when it comes to the type of conversation that he's having. The comprehensive plan pulls the data to show where there has been an abundance of development within the borough of Brooklyn, and where there's been an underdevelopment. Where they have been, we go through this NIMBY YIMBY conversation where you have these people who are like not in my backyard, and they're concerned about the character of their community. And the BP is like, listen, we have a crisis. We're in crisis mode, and we have to do something. And you have to have people who have courage, who are not scared to speak truth to power. So I think, tomorrow we're going to have this conversation. We're going to bring together a group of legislators, who have the ability to do something and to move it forward. And I applaud him for taking the lead on that. But again, as I said, there's a whole bunch of different things that need to happen. We need to start having conversations about, looking at that Nehemiah plan. That Nehemiah plan, which was from 1982, I believe it was, with Reverend Youngblood and a whole bunch of clergy came together. And so while we're talking about, we need to build more affordable housing, and we need to build, create more, equity around condos and condominiums, and the Mitchell Lama, that is not necessarily sustainable, and people don't want to have that conversation. But we've got to figure out how, we can kind of light a fire under those people who are in elective office to make those types of moves, to think about the people who actually put them in office.
Right. Just to kind of piggyback off of that, like I took a brief look at the borough president's plan. It was just a brief look. And I do agree with the notion of building more housing. I just think that what sometimes we look at things through a frame, this framing of rentership. Everything is just rentership. We're placing a ceiling on the aspirations and the potential of people by limiting their potential to just being tenants, right? So it's also, we have to consider home ownership in this equation. And I know we talk a lot about the not in my backyard thing, and I saw him mention that, and that's kind of two-pronged. Now, there are people who will say, yes, not in my backyard. We don't want these developers in our backyard. But Black people, when they say that, they are really justified, because there's a disproportionality in the overdevelopment within our neighborhoods. And you have other people in other neighborhoods, non-Black neighborhoods, where it's like their political capital is a whole lot stronger than ours, because when they say not in our neighborhoods, the conversation is immediately shut down and they pack it up and they leave. But in our neighborhoods, they're throwing in all these developments that are way outpricing the people who live in those neighborhoods. They're dumping they're putting all of the shelters, all of the halfway houses. They're putting all of these things, concentrating them into Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, but why aren't we sharing the wealth of all of this? Why aren't we spreading this out, distributing this in a reasonable and equitable manner? Because you can't continue to dump all the burden upon the one group. That's what's happening. So don't scapegoat, certain language to us while you're pretty much prioritizing everyone else. Not to say the borough president is, because I know that there's conversations that include home ownership, but we just have to recognize that home ownership is just as vital to the American project as anything else.
And I mean, just if I could just, because again, that comprehensive plan shows in clear language and with charts and graphs and everything, the neighborhoods where there has been a significant amount of development, and the neighborhoods where there's only been about 7 units of affordable housing. And now I know, Tanya, you want to say something, but just to kind of go back, when we talk about the neighborhoods that get resources, and we talk about the neighborhoods that have been underserved. And I'm talking specifically about, about North Brooklyn, about Central Brooklyn, about East New York. When you look at voting, and I'm not talking general elections, I'm talking primaries. There are EDs that are the highest, they have the highest voter turnout, whether it's primary, general election, or whatever. And those are the neighborhoods that end up getting the resources. And it's kind of like a chicken and egg type conversation, and so it's or more I should say that it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We get frustrated with leadership, we kind of pull back and say, I don't want to be involved in the process. And as a result, you get the type of leadership over and over and over again that looks like what we have right now.
You actually kind of answered the question I was going to ask. So in the development of these comprehensive plans, is there, and maybe this can't be answered right now, but is there actual outreach to the community to find out what is who wants to buy homes, right? Because everybody, again, as a realtor, I get approached by a lot of people who think they want to buy homes, and then they realize they realize that it's just not. They woke up this morning and decided I want to buy a house. They have bad credit, no saving, right? And so that's another conversation then that I'll have with them about how do we get you prepared for that process, right? I became a realtor initially, so I grew up, like I said, I don't know if I said it, but my great grandmother, she purchased properties back in the early 1900s. That's how I just grew up living in different properties, and it was impressed upon me why rent. Right? If you're going to pay rent to the person who owns the house and then buy your own house. And thankfully, I was able to go ahead and do that. And so my goal was so I did a couple of flips in other states. And I was like, you know what? I want to do this in Brooklyn because I see what's going on and I want to help people stay in my community. I know a lot of people as an agent and personally who have fled to Georgia. All of this to say that I think there's a lack of God, I wish we could have this conversation longer. There's a lack of understanding, right? So I think that if we had community members who were going to buy the houses, almost like Habitat for Humanity, let them be a part of the process, and then they will appreciate that a whole lot more than, and then the reality of sacrificing a car or a certain type of car or a certain type of, fashion. I showed an apartment today to a gentleman who's living in a shelter. He has a City Feps program, but he had on a beautiful sheepskin coat and matching wallabies. And that does, and not judging, but it's like what does that mean, right? Like, so for me, that represents so many other things. And so I think it's this comprehensive plan. The comprehensiveness of it needs to include community members, and I'm going to just say real briefly, schools. Because I've taught mortgages and financial education to kindergartners who got it, right? And I think we underestimate what our children can comprehend and understand. And so if in this comprehensive plan, we focus on teaching children, because they'll go home and they'll teach their parents what they learned. I think we're hitting it at the root at that point, because we can keep putting a Band-Aid talking about reparations and, fair housing, but we got to teach children too, so that this becomes the norm, right? Like for me, it was the norm to buy a house. Like that's what you do. That's what I've taught my children. You buy a house because of the equity, the generational wealth, the development, this, that, and the other. So in the comprehensive plan, I'm just going to throw that out there. And I say to anybody on this call, if there's anything that I can do to help as a New Yorker, as a realtor, as a financial, I'm getting certified as a financial planner come November. I'm taking my planners to sit for the exam. Like if there's anything that I can do, how we can partner resources, like let's do it.
I'd certainly like to take you up on that, Tanya. I'm a vendor with the Department of Education, so I have several programs throughout several schools throughout the city. So you mentioned that you teach it to children. So I would definitely like to connect with you in teaching our youth, our future.
Connections.
I would actually like to connect with both of you as well.
Connections all around.
with New York Homeowners Alliance, because awesome. we are offering programs, that actually reach out to schools and members of the community to help them with those aspects. So I definitely,
But
we
I
got to talk
think
about that.
it needs
And
to be the last thing I'm gonna say for now. I think it needs to not be an option, because I have reached out to schools where they told me no. You know, and or well, the charter school is doing it, but we don't have the resources for it. And I was like, I'm fine. Like, and this is what I want to do. So I think it has to be more of a mandate at some point, right? Like, I'm definitely all for the volunteer thing, but
Right.
at some point, this comprehensive plan. My goal was to build communities, have the community members help build, like literally go in and physically build while taking, it's required. You have to take financial education courses. You have to know what to do if your toilet gets stopped up, or right, like those basic things that a lot of people don't know. So, and
Right.
I
Well,
actually have
until then, New York Homeowners Alliance, we're here on the job with you.
I think, Kim, we wanted to say something really quickly.
yeah, I just wanted to add in addition, like the deed, the workshops that I told you that we're working on, like a series of workshops that we're planning on doing around deed theft, equity theft, and foreclosure prevention, will also include a component on generation to generation, building generational wealth. This is Center for New York City Neighborhoods has a Black home ownership. They have a whole department that is dedicated to Black home ownership, and generation to generation is one of the programs that we're trying to kind of boost and get out there and make sure that people are aware of this particular program and can benefit from what it is that they offer.
Thank you for sharing that, Kim. And I'm glad to see folks making connections. This is what part of these experiences are about, for folks to share resources, for folks to be able to exchange knowledge and build on each other. We're getting close to the end of the conversation, so I just wanted to kind of pull us in and give everybody an opportunity to say one thing, but just thanking you all for bringing up these different areas that connect to each other that are not necessarily related. So, you know, I love the fact that we need to be conscious of the institutional racism that informs the structures of inequity that inhibit us from real freedom, especially economic freedom and home ownership. But I also wanted to, you know, lift up the need for innovation. And I thank you, Reverend Kim, for emphasizing the Nehemiah homes. It was an incredibly brilliant project that should have never stopped expanding. And historically, for folks who want to go back and do the research, a lot of the reasons why that program was so successful was IAFs and the organizing that went around the community engagement, that Tanya, that you're identifying as being so necessary to bring in the information to a real solution. Because often when proposals like anything that any policymaker would make comes out, it's really hard to get to all of the people in the right time to enact something strategically. And that's why including people in the conversation from the beginning with power making abilities is crucial. And you know, how do we create those pathways to that power making ability given to the hands of the people who are directly impacted and need to benefit from it? So this conversation is one of many. I'm glad that we're having it this month, talking about how Black homeowners are impacted in New York City today, yesterday, and what we will do tomorrow. And I want to just thank every single person who was here to share. And so I'm going to leave it open for anyone to step up and just share a final thought about what the future needs to look like for Black homeownership, and how you feel you will be instrumental in making that happen. You muted, Tony, so I can't hear you.
All right. Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess I'll just pretty much wrap it up by saying that I want us to just keep in mind that we are in a time where a large portion of the single family homes and residential homes are being scooped up by Wall Street, private equity firms, uh, places like companies like BlackRock. They're buying hundreds of thousands of residential homes all across this country in effort to create a permanent rental economy. And one of the byproducts is that you're seeing a lot of our young people, they're pretty much detached from the dream of home ownership. You know, a lot of us as Gen X, we know what it's like. You know, the you know, work hard, you make a certain amount of money, you can put your little down payment down on the home. We knew that our goal was to buy a home, like, right? That was the beginning of our real journey through life. But that dream seems like exactly just a dream, like an unrealistic dream for so many of the younger people today. It's like it's instilled a sense of hopelessness in them where they just don't even see home ownership as attainable. And we're now in a time where, like, Black people are making more. Their income, our income is more. However, the value of our dollars is much less. So in the grand scheme of things, it is still extremely difficult to buy a home and build generational wealth. Generational wealth is what you pass down to those who come after you. And we're in a place where, like, you know, some people say by 2050, the, you know, the Black wealth is going to be like at, like, I guess the like zero by the year 2050. I think it's probably more like 2040. It's probably going to be a negative net uh, uh, wealth index. So I just want people to just let's pour into, especially the younger generation, because I don't want it to be that, you know, our access to wealth or our desire and understanding of generational wealth stops with us, because we're in an environment that has created that hopelessness where people only see their lives through a lens of, let me just get by and just do whatever I can and just pay my rent and just stay stagnant where we are. And unfortunately, that's the reality that a lot of young Black people are facing today, which is why I started my journey by trying to introduce Black people to entrepreneurship. As a real estate investor, I sold my houses primarily to young Black people who were trying to embark upon the dream of real estate investment. And so I want us to become more invested in that. Start to reach out to your young people. Teach your kids from when they're 5, 6, 7 years old about financial literacy, about investing, about home ownership. My son, at the age of 7, he was like, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be like you. I want to own some properties." So that's the type of stuff that we want to instill in our kids, as opposed to this weird place that we find ourselves in now, where everyone is just kind of throwing their hands up and walking away. That's what they want. Don't give it to them.
I just want to say also, like, we also need to take in consideration existing Black homeowners, and we need to make sure our policies take them into consideration so that they can keep their home. Because right now, you know, as we stated earlier, you know, we don't feel that support from the city, you know. And if there are programs out there that need more funding, need more attention to, so that they evolve to what is required to maintain a home in modern day, you know, society, then we need to have these discussions and make these things available, because I think that would make it even more enticing for people who don't even have home ownership in their radar. So if you give policies that help you maintain your home, plus give access to, you know, young Black, you know, New Yorkers to buy homes, I think it will, you know, tenfold increase home ownership amongst our community.
So I'll piggyback off of what Tony said, and I think that, well, I said it too. Teaching children the importance of homeownership and how to do it. What worked for me was integrating. So when my children were in preschool, learning how to read, learning the alphabets, I would actually take them past Corcoran on Fulton Street, and they were learning math and numbers, and show them the difference. Like they clearly couldn't understand it at the moment, but planting that seed of the difference between renting and then purchasing, right? And teaching them how to read in our neighborhood. Hey, what's that? That's a P. You know what I mean? And connecting them to their community and what they're learning in school, right? Because school, it doesn't stop at 3:00. Learning is forever, and it only becomes education if you use it. Otherwise, it's like a library. You got all this information, but it's not being used. So integrating those concepts into, that's why I said, from as soon as I was pregnant, when I was in grad school when I was pregnant with my daughter, and she heard all my presentations, my speeches, whatever it was, because I believe in feeding children Give them the information and they'll have it in their library when it's time for them to use it. Side note, my daughter's actually about to graduate from Wharton in real estate investments and finance, because this is just what she's known. Like, this is, and it's her passion too. But I think we don't underestimate the children. We don't forget about current homeowners, perhaps the creation of a task force to help keep Black families in, even if we have to have a 50-year mortgage, it gives us the option of reducing payments but being able to maintain our homes. So I could talk all day. Thank you all again.
I'll keep it quite succinct. I just wanted to thank Tony for allowing us all to connect. I know I can come off a little bit tough, a little bit harsh, citing history. I want to thank you, Rev Kim, for that, but you have to be pugilistic at times, so as it pertains to fighting for Black folks and correcting some of the wrongs of history. So, I'm just really happy to be part of the conversation and part of the doers that are moving us forward and progressing us. So I just want to thank all of you tonight. Thank you.
I stand by what all of you said. Thank you, Tony, for bringing us together. Thank you, Reverend Solomon, for moderating the conversation. Thank you, Brother Royal, for keeping us steeped in our history roots. Thank you, Sister Tanya, for helping us understand how important education is and passing it on to the next generation. And thank you, Phoebe, for sharing your personal story and what you've gone through. We got a lot of work to do. I'm happy to be serving with a borough president that looks at the data, looks at the information, and is not afraid to lead. So I'm gonna leave it right there.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of the panelists. What an amazing conversation. You've heard it here first from people who are directly impacted, lived experience, people who are scholars who understand the history and the context, policymakers who are in the mix, in the throes with bureaucracy, but also on the streets with the people, trying to make sure that the best policies hit the people who need it the most. And so that's why we're here. And again, we're grateful to have the conversation. Last parting words, anyone, before I give the final sign off?
Yes, I would just like to, for anyone who is interested in joining us in our fight to further Black home ownership, but not even just, Black home ownership. We do want to protect that, but we're fighting for all New Yorkers and our right to access to generational wealth. And you can follow us. You can go to our website, which is www.nyhomealliance.org. It should be in the chat. It's www.nyhomealliance.org. And you can join as a member. If you're a homeowner, you don't even have to be a homeowner to join the fight. And you can donate as well. We have a GoFundMe that we just set up because we are 100% grassroots. Our funding is exclusively by the members, all of us, the folks who are actually struggling to survive in this city. So we can use your help. We are actually working on legislation. We've just put together a legislative draft that we hope to be presenting to our New York City Council members and discussing as well, with the public advocate. So, we just want you guys to know that we're fighting for you and we can't do it alone. So we appreciate the opportunity to have this panel tonight. Thank you, Brother Solomon. We appreciate this so much.
Thank you all. And thank you, Tony, again, for being the driver, for having the courage to respond when the sense of injustice was felt. And that's what we're here for. We are the Public Advocate's Office. The New York City Public Advocate, Jumani D. Williams, is a person who's, as you heard at the top of the conversation, is passionate about this subject for the people of New York, to build equity, and to have harmonious, happy, healthy communities, because that's, at the end of the day, what we really want. And as you heard in this conversation, that's a multi-pronged effect. That means having innovation and visions and dreams. That means having knowledge of the history of the legal barriers that keep true justice from happening. And it also requires us to be on the streets, having real conversations with people who are really living it and really feeling it, so that we can understand what it is that we can do for solutions. And so, again, I'm going to leave you with one piece that we've done today, introducing intro number 401, the Credit Not Discrimination Bill. And this is a bill that would prevent lenders from discriminating against individuals. This directly applies to home ownership, and we hope that it will continue to move and pass this year. And help at least be one of many necessary stop gaps in the road to paving ourselves back to financial generational wealth and peace. So without further ado, I'm going to say goodbye to you all, New York City. Be well, be good, and know that we care for you. And on behalf of all the people that are here, much love and peace for the rest of the week.
Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month. Peace, yo.
All right.